People who actually got married on an "if we're both still single when we're 35 we'll get married" deal. What's your story? If we are still married when we are 36, we'll get a divorce. I up front told my husband when we started dating I will want to get married and have kids at some point if this works out. I'm being honest. If you don't want that, let me know now. He said I'm ready to see where this goes, and if we haven't killed each other in 3 years, let's do it. All the way through dating and our first 3 years he kept saying let me know if I ever do anything that annoyed you. Don't keep it to yourself. Okay, so I kept waiting to find something. It never came. We never argued, never got bored, and always looked forward to what the future held for us. Our 3rd year came around and we had already had little chat about if we wanted to get married. We had just moved into a new place, so I proposed, with an omelette. About 3 months later I was pregnant. We were trying, and 6 months later we married. We just celebrated our 1-year anniversary with our 10-month-old daughter. Everything is amazing. We've never felt so complete. Still not argued. Still excited about our future, and still haven't found anything that annoys me about him. Our promise wasn't for when we're 35 but 30. Through many friendships and relationships with other people, including one of us almost getting engaged to a former lover, we still remained friends. When I clocked 20, if I recall correctly, we jokingly promised to get married to each other if we weren't married by 30. Long story short, I'm 28 now and she's 26. We didn't start dating until last year and are supposed to be getting married in June if coronavirus lockdown lets us. We went through a lot of maturity and personal changes in our early 20s, and it was so admirable watching how she grew and became wove. Over the course of 5 years watching her grow, I knew she was and still is the one. No regrets here. Not married to her, but I'll tell my story anyway. One of my best friends growing up was a girl. She was my neighbor and 2 years ahead of me in school. We used to spend the summers swimming, riding bikes, eating ice cream, and laying in the grass at the park watching clouds. Typical American upbringing in the 80s to 90s. As we got older we drifted apart as we were in different grades, and hanging out with the neighbor kid who was 2 grades behind you wasn't cool. In high school though we kind of started talking again, and we'd hang out on my dock in the late evening talking about life. During one of said talks we made such a pact that if neither was married by our 30s, which seemed ages off at the time, we'd marry each other and have kids. We lost touch after she left for college and I went off to a different state as well 2 years after. I eventually married, found a job, had kids and whatnot. One night I was finished reading to my son and was sitting in his room waiting for him to drift off when I got a Facebook message. It was her. We chatted a bit and I accepted the friend request and was perusing through her profile. She was smoking hot. The next day or so she sent me a message that she was bummed to find I was married and had kids, etc. because of our pact. She sent a long message saying I had grown up to be quite attractive and successful, and that my kids were beautiful and my wife was lucky. I couldn't help but feel anything but sorrow for her. Her life looked like she lived at bars on FB and had different boyfriends every few months. She had a service industry job and something about it just seemed like it didn't fit as she was getting older. I had in fact been missing having a life and missed friendships and bars and adventures of my younger life, but I suddenly realized how living the life of a 25-year-old wasn't so great in your mind 30s, and I gained a little appreciation for the suburban family life I was in. Time is a weird thing. I'm still friends with her on FB and I like her photos of her drinking shots in neon glow, and she likes photos of my youngest in the bath. Weird couple my wife knew had such a pact and followed through. Girl was a really introverted, quiet, homely type, sweetest girl, but she never had a boyfriend as far as I knew, and we saw her off and on for 6 or 7 years. Then suddenly out of nowhere she invited us to her wedding. Anyways, it was to a guy we had met a couple of times who was one of her friends who seemed very much like her. My wife teased her that more must have been going on all that time, but she was straight up about it, and said no, they just decided it was time. Conversation was something like, yeah, you know how people have pacts to get married if neither of them are till they hit. Well, we just decided it really wasn't going to happen for either of us. And to cut that short, basically we were just like, cool, and then left it at that. Anyways, she married him. They looked happy. The speeches were a bit odd. They didn't really talk about love but a lot about how they were marrying their best friend. They are still together. It's gotta be at least 5 years. And they have a little kid. Last we saw them they looked happy and that's all that matters really. My partner and I were close friends for 12 years before we got married. Through many friendships and relationships with other people, including one of us following a former lover across the country and the other being briefly engaged, we stayed just friends for a very long time. On New Year's Eve in 2007-8, at the ripe old age of 23, we drunkenly made a pact to get married to each other if we weren't married by 30. Long story short, we didn't start dating until we both turned 30, but we got married pretty quickly after we started dating. Just celebrated 5 years of marriage, and we have a 2-year-old. It's unconventional, but so are we, and it's ours. Obligatory not me but a friend. Disclaimer, she married a college friend 3 years ago at the age of 33. The bet was to get married if they're both single at 33 and the intention was to basically prank their parents by going through with it. They intended to be married for several months and then just casually mention it, and later just get it annulled. So they went to the courthouse with a pair of friends, got married and then she moved into his apartment. Thing was they'd been friends with benefits for years when they were both single, and living together was so nice that they just stayed together. They're expecting their first kid in a few months. One of my friends from high school had a deal with this with her high school boyfriend. Thus, when they turned 30, they had a baby together. Unfortunately, she was also a drug addict and ended up committing a felony, going to prison, and I'm pretty sure the kid is with him, and even though she's out of prison now she can't have her daughter with her at whatever housing she is at. Do not recommend. My really good friend and I were joking about this in our early 20s and I got an idea how she really felt about me when she said, yeah, if we're both single at 70 let's get married. Not exactly the same, but when I was 21 and he was 24 I said to my friend, if we're not married by the time you're 30 do you want to get married? He said no. Well, we started actually dating a couple months after and this year he will be 30 in May and our wedding is planned for June * pending COVID-19 lets us gather 30 people and travel within our country. A friend and I had an agreement we'd marry if we were both single when he was 53 and I 49. Last year I was the witness to his marriage and signed their license. I was 47. 2 months later he gets super nasty with me and accused me of doing drugs. I was using CBD oil for pain. He's been nothing but nasty with me since and I've cut ties with him. I now see how he was manipulative and mentally abusive about my mental and physical issues. I feel I dodged a bullet. Thankful and grateful it was her and not me. I've no other single male friends to make such a pact with. Wish there was after reading some of these answers. I did, but we got married 10 years earlier. We met at an Ink Master finale. We immediately connected. He lived in New York. I, Florida. I went back home and we kept in touch. Made a promise if by the time we were 35 we'd marry each other. I was 25 at the time. Things intensified so much we truly believed we were meant for each other. I moved to Illinois to take care of my sick grandma. 3 months after meeting he flew there to visit and we got married. After a few more visits he moved there too. 4 years later and we have 2 kids. My parents had this kind of pact. Here is the story. Both of them were focusing mostly on their careers and didn't have time for marriage before then. They had been dating on and off for 7 years and my mother was afraid of getting too old to marry. So she left her island home and a great job in newspaper marketing for the mainland and they got married. Things went south pretty quickly. Both of them were working up to 20 hours a day, and they didn't see each other much. I suppose their loneliness got to my father, because he slipped into depression and developed a pornography addiction, accused my mother of having an affair, and tried to kill himself. Things got worse when my mother miscarried what would have been my older brother or sister. I only know what little I could gather from hearing them fight after I was born, and I know there's much more to the story than what I know. Along I came a few years later after they had been trying for a child for years, and lo and behold, I have a birth defect and I almost die, but I lived. A few surgeries later, I'm relatively healthy and my dad quits his job to look after me. When I grew up enough to not need constant supervision anymore. However, my dad wouldn't get another job. My parents fought over it for years, and it kind of destroyed what was left of their marriage. The only reason they don't fight anymore is because my mother just gave up. Things only got worse as I grew. The house where I grew up now looks like a home out of hoarders because my mother doesn't have time to clean, as she is the only breadwinner for the family, and my father is too depressed. He's stubborn and has a bad temper, so he acts like it's our problem whenever we bring it up and refuses to go to therapy. He hardly ever leaves the house and doesn't really have any friends. He's only gotten worse since my grandmother died. I can't say anything more, because I'm too ashamed of the rest. It's quite sad to see two otherwise good people be so horrible to each other and live in such a sad state. Kind of. We left our spouses around the same time, not for each other, and decided to share a house. We got to taking one night and decided we each had all the things the other was looking for. Plus we got along really well. We were in our mid-30s by then and sick of the dating scene, so we just laid it out like a business arrangement. What started off as an arrangement eventually evolved into something extremely serious and passionate. We've been together now for almost 7 years and married for almost 1. We are extremely in love and I have zero regrets.